Hi, it's me Jacqueline. Welcome to my channel. If you're new to the channel, then please subscribe my channel and visit my Patreon page, link in the description. The news that I was replacing Kay was all over the station by the next day, and people were congratulating me from the second I arrived. I thought that they were making too big a fuss considering I was only going to be in the job for 3 weeks, but then I learned that that particular piece of information hadn't been circulated. So I spent the next few hours explaining that I was only filling in until the new anchor arrived. Even Kay Peterson congratulated me, and I congratulated her and wished her well in San Francisco. She took the opportunity to tell me about her new job and the station where she was going. I listened attentively and smiled at all the right places. By the time she was done talking, I expected her to invite me to a girls' night out, but she thankfully stopped short of that. With any luck, her excitement would last until her final broadcast because she was being more pleasant than at other times since I'd met her. Arriving at the station on the 18th, I walked to my desk near the weather monitoring lab, but was informed by Mr. Pyler's assistant that I should move my things. I thought it was silly to move for just 3 weeks, but I guessed that the new temporary weather person would want to use my old desk. I followed her through the newsroom and down a hallway, passing through 2 doors and eventually into a small office. "Here's your desk, Miss James," she said, pointing to the only desk in the office. "I get an office?" I asked incredulously. "Yes, each anchor has an office. The computer has already been set up to accept the same password that you used as a weather person, but the permission level has been changed and you now have full access to the news stories instead of just the weather scripts." "Thank you. Let me know if you need anything," she said before leaving, closing the door behind her. I stepped behind the desk and opened a couple of drawers in the desk. Kay had cleaned out everything before leaving, and it looked like the cleaning crew had thoroughly cleaned the desk and office. I dropped my purse into the file drawer and sat down. Powering up the computer, I started reviewing the day's news stories. I had been devouring the news for the past couple of weeks, paying extra close attention to the broadcasts while I was working, and watching the cable news networks for at least 2 hours each morning. Lisbeth had begun to complain that I was spending too much time watching television, but I considered it homework. At 5 minutes past 4, Mr. Pyler's assistant came to my office. "Miss James, they're waiting for you in the conference room." "What? Who's waiting?" "The senior news staff. The meeting started 5 minutes ago." Jumping up, I hurried to the conference room and endured the stares of everyone there as I sat down in the only available chair. "I'm sorry for holding everyone up. I didn't know that I was supposed to be here." "It's okay, Ashley," Mr. Pyler said. "We realize that this is all new to you. Just be here at 4 o'clock every weekday from now on." "Yes, sir. I will." Over the next hour, the day's news stories and their order of presentation in the broadcast was discussed. A couple of stories from the earlier broadcasts were dropped and a couple of new stories were added. When we broke up, I asked Don to explain a couple of points, and he helped me understand the things that had gone over my head during the meeting. I went back to my office to study the wire service stories a little more. At 5:30, I walked to the makeup room. Claire was alone, so she started on me right away. Don came in about 5 minutes later and took his usual seat. "All set for the big debut?" he asked. "All set. My head is stuffed with news stories." "Nervous?" "A little, but it's not much different than doing the weather, except I'll be talking longer." Before my first broadcast, I was as nervous as a 10-year-old Tennessee bride on her wedding night, Don said. "I came in after having been a reporter for 5 years. I was used to doing my reports on tape, and if I flubbed a line, I'd mutter a small epithet under my breath and start the report again. Doing a live broadcast scared the ever-living hell out of me. I'd probably be just as nervous if I hadn't been doing the weather for 2.5 months. It was great experience for this job. It probably wouldn't have made much of a difference with you. Dennis tells me that you only tape a second report in case there's a mechanical problem with the equipment. Your first report has been the one the station's used every time." Claire finished with me and moved to Don. "The only thing worrying me is that they'll insert a new story and I won't know how to pronounce the names. Don't let that bother you. Someone in the control room will correct you immediately if that happens. Just do what I do, pretend to clear your throat, then pronounce it correctly." I smiled. Okay, Dawn. Thanks. The door to the makeup room opened and Keith, the meteorologist, walked in. Keith, I said, are you doing the weather report tonight? Yes. Paula isn't able to return early and Virginia, Diane, and Charles have too many commitments. Paula promises to be back in 3 weeks, as scheduled, and the others will try to fill in where they can between now and then. I'm sorry to be the cause of you losing your evenings. It's not your fault, Ashley. It happens in this business. I'm happy that you're getting a chance to co-anchor. The show must go on. When Don was cued, he welcomed the audience, introduced himself, and then made the announcement about me. Those viewers watching this past Friday know that Kay Peterson has left KBXF-TV for a position with a station in San Francisco. A new co-anchor has been hired, but for the next several weeks Ashley James, who has turned in her weather girl hat to join me here at the desk, will fill in as co-anchor. Ashley? Thank you, Dawn. I'm sure everyone wishes Kay all the happiness in the world at her new job, and I'll try to fill her shoes ably. Our top news story this evening. I began reading from the teleprompter, and I was glad to see that the top story hadn't changed for my first story from the desk. The broadcast went well, and before I knew it, we were saying goodnight. Most of the lights were turned off, leaving us in very low light as the credits rolled, and then we heard, "We're off," in our earphones. Dawn was the first to congratulate me, followed by Keith and most of the crew. I hadn't felt any more nervous than when I did the weather, but there was a lot more going on in my earphone, and trying to concentrate on reading the story while absorbing control room instructions without showing sign of being distracted was the most difficult part of the hour. Luckily, I hadn't encountered any difficult names during my first broadcast from the desk. After thanking everyone, I walked to the makeup room with Dawn where we wiped off the heavy cosmetics and I fixed my face. "It's a damned shame," Dawn said to me. "What's a shame?" "That you're going back to Massachusetts and relative seclusion. If I'd had your talent when I was your age, I'd be working the anchor desk at one of the big 3 networks these days. There must a station near your home that would love to have you working there." "I'll check with the local stations after I return home," I said, knowing that I couldn't. Unable to reference my broadcasting experience here, I knew that a high school student applying for a reporter position probably couldn't even get the time of day from a local station manager. The next few days were uneventful, but on Friday I received a shock that sent me hurrying to Mr. Graham's office. I knew that I wasn't expected to work on weekends now because the extra preparation work placed a heavier demand on my weekday time, but I hadn't expected my paycheck to change. I sat outside Mr. Graham's office until he was able to see me. "Come in, Ashley. I've been meaning to tell you what a wonderful job you're doing as co-anchor with Dawn. You two work together as well as he and Kay did, perhaps better." "Thank you, Mr. Graham. I feel very comfortable working with Dawn." I paused for a couple of seconds before continuing. "Mr. Graham, I just received my paycheck. I hadn't expected the gross to change. Is there a mistake?" "No, I don't think so. We decided that since you're filling in for Kay and doing such an outstanding job at it, you should receive the same pay that she did." I nodded. "You're making it awfully difficult for me to leave KBXF. We're doing our best. We hoped that you might reconsider and agree to stay on. The co-anchor position is gone, but we'll find a place for you. We'll do whatever we can to help you and your mother settle here. We'll help you find a house and help your mom find a new job. That should tell you how much we want you here." "I really appreciate it, Mr. Graham. I really do. But I have to stick by my decision." "Okay, Ashley. But if you change your mind, the offer remains open." "Thank you, Mr. Graham." The end of summer began to fly at me after that. Even with my weekends free, I couldn't believe how quickly the days passed. Lisbeth and I shopped almost every day, usually running into some of her friends getting their fall school wardrobe ready. On weekends I would lay around the pool during the day and go out with George in the evenings. My cousins worked every weekend, and I felt a little guilty about not being able to help, but having the weekends off was wonderful. On my last day at the station, I walked around and said goodbye to everyone. I was sad to be leaving, but I had a lot of great memories to take with me. During the last few minutes of my final broadcast, Don told the audience that I was leaving to return to school and said how much he and the other station employees would miss me. I got a little choked up and struggled to suppress the tears. At 11:30, I left the station for the last time. Suzanne was there to pick me up and drive me to the house. I had an airline ticket for Sunday, but I was really sad about going. I wished with all my being that there was a way I could stay. My 3 cousins left for the catering shop early Saturday morning. I suppose that I could have joined them, being that I was no longer employed by KBXF, but I wanted to have a last day of summer before I left. Tomorrow I'd say goodbye to my cousins as they left for work, and then take a taxi to the airport. But today I intended to enjoy myself. I spent the morning and early afternoon by the pool, and then began getting ready for my final date with George. We were going out to dinner and then to a movie, with our final destination being a couch in the rec room. Of course, by that time my cousins would be home, and I didn't know how much privacy we'd have. As I dressed for my date, I decided not to wear a corset. Having worn one every day and every night for months, my waist had narrowed sufficiently to fit into any of my clothes without it. I knew that my waist would slowly expand now that I wouldn't be wearing one anymore, as my internal organs settled back into previous positions, and I wondered how long my shape would continue to look so decidedly feminine. Like most of my clothes, the plum-colored skirt and semi-transparent long-sleeved white blouse that I'd selected for tonight hugged my form. Although my punishment sentence was over, I was still wearing the clothes that Lisbeth had altered. I had so many clothes that I hadn't wanted to spend any more of the funds intended for my college fund to procure more. I still didn't have a pair of shoes with heels less than 4 inches, and many were 5 inches. The only shoes that matched the skirt had 5-inch heels. George picked me up at 6 and drove us to a seafood restaurant downtown. I had a shrimp cocktail appetizer followed by a scallop dinner, while he had a shrimp cocktail and a dinner of oysters. Of course, we shared a little of each other's meal, but I didn't care for the raw oysters. As we enjoyed our desserts, a young girl approached the table and asked for my autograph. I had been asked a couple of dozen times over the summer, and I was always flattered to give it. The movie that we went to see wasn't memorable, but we had a good time anyway. I knew that George was anxious to get to the house because he was feeling very amorous. Perhaps it was the oysters? As I dug through my purse for the key to the front door, George pulled me to him. I knew that I'd have to give in if I expected to get away long enough to find my key and open the door, so I leaned my head back as he bent his head towards mine. Our lips met and we kissed. I felt his tongue and parted my lips to allow him entry into my mouth as I wrapped my arms around his neck. He lowered his hands and began kneading my tush. Suddenly the light over the front door popped on and I heard the door open. I wasn't embarrassed about kissing in front of my cousins, but I knew that they'd make some remark if we didn't come up for air soon, so I slowly tried to disentangle myself from George. I pushed his tongue out of my mouth and lowered my arms. He took the hint and relaxed his grip on my tush. As I looked towards the front door, I froze and dropped my purse to the porch floor. My stomach started doing flips and I pressed my left hand against it to hold it down. "Mom," I exclaimed loudly. Please subscribe for the next part and visit my Patreon page for early access.